Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you're going to look at this video. Going to be short and sweet today because the two lessons I think, if you do the readings in the book and the supplemental readings, are pretty much obvious. I don't think anything in here really shocks us. I want to give you a couple thoughts of my thoughts on how we can look at this information and why it's important and how it's used in public health. Um, let's first start off quickly with the assignment that's due on Sunday. Um, don't get crazed on this assignment. It's fairly simple. What we want to do is talk about data, and we're talking about is data presentation. We're also talking about um, when you start looking at data, some of the popular misconceptions you have are proven either affirmed or proven wrong. So there's a little video I put in there about some of the things that people think that are absolutely wrong. Uh, I think one of the things I look at right now is if you went up and down the street and you found somebody with a red hat on that has "Make America Great Again," and you ask them, what's the crime rate for Ill- illegal or immigrants that are in this country without proper verification? What's their crime rate? And they'll say, "Oh, it's horrible. It's worse than anybody else." Look at the numbers, and it's absolutely less than it's one of the smallest numbers of any population. You go ask a liberal, and they'll say they'll know that, but we all get whipped in sometimes to believe things that aren't true. So, for example, the crime rate for non citizens is lower than for citizens, but that's not what lots of people want to believe. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we first start talking about infants, babies. Uh, uh, I always love. I think some of you. I think you both know that I'm a brand new grandfather, and I went to my grandbaby's first birthday here last week, and babies are great because I don't know. Well, most people, 99% of the people I know, when they see babies, get that, "Oh, I want to hold them. I want to," and it makes it so funny when I read or hear or see in the paper where somebody does something horrible to a child, to a baby. It just boils my blood. I can't figure out how that happens. Uh, but we look in the animal world. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. We look in the animal world. I remember when I was a young kid and I had guppies, a little fish tank of guppies, and so as you're 7 or 8 years old, you're learning the life cycle and how it all works. So we had a pregnant mother guppy, and one night we sat there and watched the babies being born. And guppies have like 20, 30 children, little hatchlings all at a time. And they're just tiny. They're almost about the size of a grain of rice. And so I went to bed and I understood how that all worked, and I was really feeling good. And I woke up the next morning and there were no little baby guppies there. And I said to my dad, "What happened?" He said, "No, the mother ate them all." Uh, because they don't know the difference between their children and food, and they look like food. So there's some people that don't relish babies, guppies, for example, but I know most of us do. Why is children? That's my funny story for the day, I guess. I hope. But anyway, why are we so concerned about children? Well, statistics show time and time again that good prenatal and postnatal care, both of the child, uh, generates tremendous savings down the line. That children that are taken care of in the first 2 years of their life use significantly less medical care for the rest of their life than children who are not given that opportunity. So it's sort of like pay me now or pay me later more. So that's very important. Um, we we're going to find in this whole chapter that there's a tremendous tie-in to awareness, education, whatever you want to call it. We have the medical technology over here, and we have this whole group of people over here. It's the people who aren't using it, or aren't aware of it, or can't access it. Now, if these got together, we'd be in great shape. But in most cases, it's strictly a situation of we can't get the people who need the care uh, completely involved in the care. Now, why is that? Is it education? Is it tradition? Is it location? Probably a little bit of everything. Again, you guys are, when I usually teach, I've taught a lot of courses up here in New York City, and you can't, I mean, there's a doctor every street corner. I pass 3 hospitals every day when I drive. So the access here is much more available. The usage is probably more available, but still not tight because people can't access it because of money or transportation or other things. As you move farther around the country, and I'm sure down in the western part of Virginia, I know absolutely. I was in Kansas for a job one time, for a consulting job one time, and I think I mentioned before the nearest there was a hospital in town that had 7 beds and 2 doctors on the hospital staff, but the nearest tertiary care facility was over 100 miles away. The nearest secondary care facility was about 40 miles away. There were 3 doctors in our town. One didn't do hospitals, and in the other town there were 4 where the hospital was. So there were 7 doctors to service a large physical area. Probably not a large population, but a large physical area. So both of those things are count. The hospital was called a critical access hospital. If you ever are looking for a subject to write a paper on about access, take a look at critical access hospitals and their purpose, and there's probably 1 or 2 really great papers in there that and a lot of information. But anyway, to get back to the idea, why don't people use medical facilities, especially in the prenatal and postnatal and first year of life? There's lots and lots of reasons, and one of the portions of this idea of public health that we talk about, community health, we talk about is how do we reach those people? How do we get them integrated into the system? And that's kind of the challenge, and why that is. And well, the book talks a little bit about it. Once they establish the need, they talk about the idea about unmarried women are less likely to get it. They talk about teenage birth and teenage pregnancies. They're very much less likely to receive care. I had a friend who was involved in social work, and she always used to say it's children raising children. Uh, and to a large extent, that's true in teenage birth. Most, the large majority are single moms uh, with families that either are supportive or non-supportive, but not the traditional family unit that society kind of dictates. So you find that this whole part of the course is kind of a mash of education, of social work, of real social issues, kind of excluding or extra to the idea of healthcare. We always look at healthcare. We can look at healthcare, as do we have the right tools? Do we have the right hospitals? Do we have the right this? And for this we do, but it's just getting the people who need it and the people who provide it together. Uh, there's not a lot of magic in childbirth. I mean, my mother-in-law was father-in-law both came from Yugoslavia, and they would talk about women who would go out in the fields and have a baby in the fields, put it in a cradle or on the back of a wagon or something, finish working, and then go back home with the baby that night. Now, I don't know. It's like all those stories that us old people tell. Maybe not quite that way, but anyway. What we find, though, is the more care we get, the better we are. So we get back to teenage births, and we find out what really happens is teenagers who have children drop out of school at a higher rate. Their marriages are not successful if they do get married. much more rely on public assistance, and much more involved in the poverty side of America. So there's lots of things that are fighting against getting great care. Uh, just the cycle, and to break that cycle, to break the cycle of teenage care, to break the cycle of uneducated, and I'm not talking like, I'm talking poverty. I'm talking people in poor situations who are uneducated. They also don't have access. But there's people that are fair to middle and that don't understand or don't practice prenatal care and postnatal care. They just uh, working in a healthcare clinic with OBGYNs over my career. I have a set of stories about this long of when the doctors would come back with amazing stories about people that didn't get care. I was in a rural community at one time, and we still had lots of moms come in delivering babies that they were drug dependent, that they never, the first time they've seen the doctor is when they were cranked into the emergency room. So it's a real problem, and because it's a real problem if we have anybody in a country as rich and as in benefits and rich in assets as we are. We should be protecting our children a lot better, and how we go about doing that. It's not. I think it's not so much from lack of desire, but just lack of implementation. I'm sure you've all heard the idea that the devil's in the detail, or the devil's in the organization. You hear the delivery, the implementation. We could all sit in our rooms and write papers about how wonderful things could be, but to make those happen is really the skill. When you see that in work, you get a great idea, or somebody in your organization gets a great idea, but to overcome all the inertia, to overcome all the things that are happening to get it to work, that's the real hard part. And I think when I look at this whole chapter on infant care, I think that's the real hard part, getting it involved to all the people that really care. We go on and we talk about family planning, unintended pregnancies. Um, Big topics again today. It's been very much of a cycle type thing. For the longest time, we had um, organizations lobby and address the lawmakers to have one to stay out of the woman's reproductive life. Then we got a group as the women's movement moved up, improved and it was invigorated. We've had a group that come back and say, my life, my body, and so we came out with Roe versus Wade in 1973 that said abortions are legal in certain stages of pregnancy, and it's been expanded, contracted, and but from 73 to 83 to 93 to 2003 to 2018, 2019, we've seen a movement now back, driven by religious organizations and conservative um, politicians. And I'm not going to paint, Republicans, Democrats, Southerners. You can find a large enough group of people on both sides of this question that don't fit the image that you think. But generally, it's conservative Christian folks that are against abortion, and it's liberal other people who are for it. The book talks about all the different people, the age groups, and the majority of abortions are unmarried women and young unmarried women. Um, I don't know whether it do us any good for me to talk about my view or you, because we're not in class. If we were in class, maybe we could have a discussion about it. But for me to give you thoughts about it, I'm sure you pretty two intelligent women have developed your own thoughts on this. But I want you to understand how controversial it is, and we do. I mean, you got to be like brain dead not to know that. And it's very polarizing. I mean, there's lots of issues I've seen where we can kind of reach some agreement on, but as first, unfortunately, as politics has moved in recent years, there's a lot less of those that we can both reach agreement on. But this is absolutely one that I don't think we ever reached agreement on, or never even came close to reach agreement on. And if you look at the numbers, they're not overwhelming in either case. I think the people that are pro-abortion or pro-women's rights are pro-choice are probably in the high 50s, low 60s, and but the people that are anti-abortion or pro-life or anti-choice are probably in the low 40s, and so that's a pretty significant number of people. Um, we're just going to sit down and see how it works out. Is abortion the best method of birth control? No, and I don't think anybody, pro-choice, pro-life, pro-football, whatever, I don't think anybody is saying that it's the best, but should it be an option on the table? And that's the question that public health gets involved in, that we all get involved in as citizens, and it's pretty much unresolved. So we'll just kind of know the facts as we do, and control our emotions and be able to talk semi professionally about it. Maternal health important also. We have seen an increase in maternal health deaths according to the textbook, and then there's a quick little line under there. But that may be a result of the changes in the way we count the maternal deaths, or the way changes we get in information. And that's the point we brought, I guess, in our one or two classes ago about infant mortality, and that's why I've kind of breezed over that, because we talked about it before. The whole idea of when you count and where you count and how you count really influences the ways the numbers work. And when we start looking at the national or the international numbers, what happens is we'll send all the numbers in, and World Health Organization only captures this piece here and doesn't capture the whole thing, or captures the whole thing and not these numbers. So always want to look, and I lecture on that probably. Hopefully that's a takeaway you're going to have from this course, about know where you get the numbers. Infant health, lots of factors. The mother, the education level of the mother, the income level of the mother, where they fit, the ethnicity of the mother, nutrition, prenatal care, postnatal care, immunizations. By the way, if don't ever introduce me to an anti-vaxxer, because I will go crazy. I think that's probably one of the stupidest things I've ever heard of. That it's almost as bad as the people who think the Earth is flat, or the people that think we didn't land a man on the moon. These are all government spokey conspiracies, and the anti-vaxxers, I think, are living in that, and living in absolute stupidity. My opinion, and feel free to disagree, but maybe let's not disagree online. Infant mortality is declining. Better clinical care, better access, better medicines. The leading causes of infant mortality obviously are congenital abnormalities, something that happens in the meeting of the X and Y chromosome. It's also the leading reason for spontaneous abortions, not planned abortions, but miscarriages is another phrase for that. We're trying to improve health by trying to keep babies to term, by much better surveillance in the womb. I go from when my son was born until my granddaughter was born, and And when my son was born, they used to strap a thing around and you could listen, ultrasound, and you could listen to his heartbeat. Now, within several months, you can see pictures inside. So we do a much better job of surveillance pre pregnancy. Cigarette smoking, obviously low birth rate, which is a kind of a cause and a marker for infant mortality. That if low birth weight children have higher death rates than normal birth rate children because they don't thrive as well. And cigarette smoking, alcohol, and other drugs. Big portion in there about breastfeeding, and that's kind of a new thing. And then this sudden infant death syndrome. Um, I don't know you guys, and I hope not, but as you get older, as you go through life, you run into people, and probably one of the bigger tragedies that I ever experienced. I mean, when you're an old person, in their 70s, 80s, dies, it's a sad time, but you say, well, they've lived a good life, hopefully, and such. People who lose children because of SIDS within the first year, uh, it rips my heart out. And again, it's something we don't know what causes it. We're treating an awful lot of symptoms. I know. Again, you see today all the different things that we never thought of when I was growing up. Babies have to be on their back. They can't have pillows, all this kind of good stuff, because they think there's some contributory factors to SIDS. And so we don't know. What's the largest cause of death in children? Unintentional injuries, um, accidents, falls, those things. Nothing, and then maltreatment, and then we get down into infectious diseases and cancers. So uh, the most deaths are caused by unplanned things. Uh, we talk. The government has taken a big step into children because, back as I said in the beginning, we all like children. We all think that and they are our future, right? The country that there's a whole series of countries in the world and in the United States where the birth rate is declining, and economists are sitting there worrying about the future because economies grow based on the growth of the birth rate. I mean, when we're blowing people out the top, dying, we have to have people coming up through the bottom, and that's one of the reasons. If you're talking to an economist or you read about the baby boomers from an economic standard, it's going to be a danger because there's an awful lot of old people that will be leaving jobs and not enough newer young people to fill them in because the baby boomer was such a bulge in the birth rate. But Title V provides child care. That's probably the single place that does that. WIC. WIC is to provide nutritional aid, Women's, Infants, and Children program, to provide nutritional aid for breastfeeding women and for children. It's to make sure that they have the nutrition and the right foods so that they can thrive in their early age. You look at WIC enrollees, there's a little chart in the book, and you can see that a lot of states that have a large lower income population and take a lot of WIC care. What have we found? We found that children with insurance are healthier because they see the doctor more, or because their parents are working in a job that they're smarter, they're more experienced, they're more enculturated with going to the doctor. Uh, Medicaid, low-income individuals and families, children are slightly more than half of all Medicaid beneficiaries. So again, when you see somebody running around all the time yelling about all those useless people on Medicaid, it's mostly kids. It's not guys like me. Yeah, well, I'm on Medicare, so I'm a loafer on that. But everybody talks about low-income people that they'd rather sit around and get on Medicaid. They're not the big users of Medicaid. The first big users of Medicaid are children. The second big users of Medicaid are people with disabilities that can't work. So again, use your figures for yourself when people start saying stuff. Don't believe everything you hear. CHIP is for uninsured children who don't qualify for Medicaid. It was a program devised by Mrs. Clinton when she was involved in as a first lady, and it's still around and still a great deal. Uh, FMLA, don't get me started. That's not what it means. The Family Medical Leave and Separation Act, Family Medical Leave Act, excuse me, and that lets the mother tend for the child or the father tend for the child. Uh, but we are one of only two or three industrialized countries that don't have paid FMLA. Um, why? Because we go on. There's a whole idea that the country was founded on what they call the Protestant work ethic, that you only get paid if you work. And lots of other countries think that the government has a duty to take care of children, and they could pay mothers that are off on pregnancy. But then there's the other side that says, well, then everybody get pregnant. And anybody that's had a child I know loves it and all that other kind of good stuff. But it's not like, well, hey, I'll get pregnant tomorrow too. But anyway, we're a country that just instituted FMLA, and we still don't offer woman compensation. So how many mothers do I know, or that I've had working for me, that couldn't stay home with their child at a great time when they're first young, they're formative, lots of things happen in their brain in that first 6, 8, 10 months, but they couldn't stay home with their child because they needed to work. Uh, that's just the way it is here, and maybe not the greatest thing in the world. So then we go on to adults, adolescents, and young adults. Adolescents 10 to 24, adults 25 to 64. I know a lot of people in their 50s that I'm not sure are adults yet. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people 18, 19, 20, especially when I served in the Navy, who I thought were very adult. Um, but that's kind of an attitude rather than a definition. So we'll stay with the age 25 to 64 adults. 10 to 64, the productive years of your life. Um, I guess I'm still productive, but we look at, when you go look at YPLL we talked about and everything, that if you ever look at a insurance chart of what the average compensation of a person should be who dies, it really peaks in the middle of your career because you have a long way. So, for example, my life isn't worth very much because I only have a couple of years left and I'm not very productive. If I was a man in my 30s, or a woman in my 30s, probably my life is worth a heck of a lot more because I have a lot more of my life to live, and I could be doing great things. Um, Adolescents and young adults represent our future. The book says, and I love this, it's a difficult period of transition from child to adulthood. Hello. If you've done it yourself, which we all have, you know, and especially if you have access or around young teenagers today, you realize it's a difficult time. We're physically growing, emotionally growing, and start being subject to the inputs from the world around us. So it's a difficult time. A lot of attitudes are challenged and changed there. You look at youth, and you kind of look. I have lots of friends that are in that age group, nieces and nephews, and friends of nieces and nephews. I was probably the stupid guy. I was like, yeah, life's great. But I mean, now they want to change the world, and they want to save the cow, and they're vegans and vegetarians, and lots of things that I never even thought of when I was growing up. But as the education level and the social media level comes up, there's a lot more on their plate than it was back when I was a younger guy. And obviously, I had more than my parents had. So I don't know what's going to happen. Let me just turn this phone call off. I did, thank you. Uh, the demographics, about 54% of the adolescents in 2000. I love this statistic, by the way. This is really one that kills me. 54% of adolescents were non-Hispanic whites. Well, that means 46 were people of color. It's not a real gigantic spread there. I don't know why they thought that'd be so cool. The one thing that does is about a quarter of the children now live in single parent families, and that varies by race and ethnicity as well as social condition. Um, this isn't the sociology course, and if you've taken the sociology course somewhere in your career, God love you. Wasn't one of my favorites, but they talk about the family unit and what the traditional family unit is, and in today's world, what is the new modern family unit, and how that's necessary. There's an awful lot of literature written both sides of this question. Boy, Mr. Popular tonight. Hold on, let me pause this a second.
Call from music. Call from music.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah, it was a call I had to take, but anyway, I'll splice these two together, and hopefully we'll be okay. Hold on, my notes just flew off. So anyway, we're talking about the family unit, and it's changed. In the 40s and the early 50s, the family unit was mom, dad, 3 kids, 2.5 kids. Much different today, and vive la différence. There's an awful lot of different types of families, and by the type of families, single mom families have lots and lots of issues that are different than a 2-parent conventional family, whatever that is. But they can be successful, and we as a society have to learn to tailor our programs and our services to what's there, not what we think should be there. So people that say, we're spending money on single parent families, that's fine. That's who's there. A quarter of the population is there. So when we look at public health, we look at lots of things in our lives. Let's be careful not to think what we know, but rather than what we see. It's always a customer service business. I'm an old marketing major as an undergraduate. So when we look at this idea, we don't put a product out for people who won't buy it. So we have to see what the people want, and that's the product we have to give. So what we're really saying when we look at all these statistics is this is what our population is, and this is what we have to tailor programs for. We don't need to tailor programs for the 1% of the population. We need to do for the majority. So anyway, we talk about the demographics of the young adolescent. Pretty much the same. There's some disparities in race and ethnicity. We're seeing more people of color in almost all areas. Lots of adolescents are employed now, and some of that affects the insurance. Mortality, we have gotten better at health. We have gotten better at preventative care. We have gotten better at acute care. We've made advances in medicine, advances in disease treatment. So we're finding now that more people are dying, especially as adolescents, from behaviors rather than from disease. Male mortality rates higher than females. Most of the threats are injury, 41%, homicide 17%, and suicide 15%. So those are the things that are killing adolescents, not mainly disease. And again, these are behaviors, and one of the things we have to understand in community health is we deal with behaviors also as well as medicine. We talk about the idea of morbidity, communicable diseases. Uh, One of the other things is with the advent of uh, more uh, vaccinations, more preventive medicine. Lots of our diseases are not there. One of the problems, one of the high diseases, is part of adolescents and sexually transmitted diseases, STDs. Uh, and again, it's when now anybody mentions STDs, first thing everybody says AIDS, HIV. Well, there's an awful lot of other sexually transmitted diseases that are epidemic in that area also. So when you look at adolescence, what's really being the public health problem again is education and behavior modification. Um, there's a they talk about behavior of high school students and college students, and the one thing I found is things that I did in college now kids are doing in high school. Maybe in another two generations I'll be doing it in grade school, or by the time my grandbaby gets to kindergarten, she'll be, doing 16 ounces in the back of a car. But no, but anyway, we find that it's pretty much the same thing: unintentional industries, violence, tobacco usage, alcohol and other drugs, sexual behaviors, unintended pregnancies. Um, One of the things that we find now that you hear all the time is physical inactivity among the youth, obesity, kids sitting down and playing with the games and not going out and running around. And it's kind of interesting to me because there's more people, I think, exercising and running and doing stuff than there ever's been, but there's also probably a larger amount they're not doing anything. Again, an education piece, an awareness piece, and an opportunity to succeed. Uh, the other thing that about youth and adolescence is there's a little more protective scheme around them. We want to take care of children, we want to take care of kids. So the society brings that in. Okay. Adults 22 to 64, 23 to 64, 25 to 64, wherever you want to put it, more than half of the population. The richest part of the population, the older you get, the older population is richer than the younger population. People say, it's just a matter of living, when I was first starting out, my first year I worked in 1969, I made $5,800 in that year, the year of 1969. I know that because the Social Security keeps track of all that stuff. So I made $5,800. I was making more than that in a 2-week paycheck when I retired from healthcare. So when we start looking at money and and plus the fact is I've had 30 years to acquire money. I'm a business guy by heart, and the magic of compounding interest. I'm starting to put money away in a fund for my granddaughter, and I started putting money away for my retirement a long time ago, and now it gives me a revenue, and so it's easy to talk about savings. It's tough to do, and sometimes I had to make some changes on that, but it worked. But adults, half the population, the richest part of the population, why do we die? Chronic disease, cancer, heart disease. Most of them are associated with some unhealthy behavior or personal choices. Lifestyle improvements in public health have lengthened the average lifespan. Remember we talked about that way back when. It didn't. When the lifespan gets longer, like 75 years now, it's not for me. It's for the people that were born today. That's the projected life. So I used to always think when they say, "Oh yes," and the average male now is projected to live to 76.3 years, and I'm going, "Yeah, I got 5 more years." No, I don't. But anyway, so we have the two competing factors. We have the better medicine, but we have the chronic disease that's coming up there, and we have the bad personal life choices: smoking, drinking, obesity, lack of exercise. But other things get you no matter what. I always remember there was, and this is way before your guys' time, but in the 70s that there was a great explosion of running in America. And there was a book by a gentleman by the name of Jim Fixx, Fixx. It was called The Runner's Diary or something, and it made the bestseller list. And Jim was a guy that was about 260 pounds, and he ran in high school, and he started running again at age 40. And he narrated how he lost weight, he felt better, all his body chemicals were in good shape, his potassium and his lipids and his cholesterol and all were great. He also smoked about 3 packs a day, and he quit smoking, and how everything was great, and he was running, and everybody said, hey, the cure, let's all start running. Jim died at 55 of a heart attack. And you see that a lot in healthcare, where people will come into the doctors and lead a rotten life, and then get to be about 60 and come into the doctors and say, hey, I never took care of myself, but I'm ready to now. Too late. So a lot of things. And other pieces are just the luck of the draw. I always remember the guy who played Superman. Was in a tragic accident. He was riding a horse, and he fell and cracked his spine, and lived for about 5 or 6 years completely paralyzed, and his wife took care of him, and it was such a he finally passed, and it was such a tragic story, and everybody uh, uh, was worried and cried and carried on. And about 6 months later, his wife announced that she had never smoked, never been near anybody who smoked, but she had lung cancer, and she died about a year later. And it kind of snapped everybody in that everybody thinks that, "Oh, well, I've never smoked, so I won't get this, or I've never drank, so I'll get this." Your chances are much less, but there's no guarantee that you won't get it. You won't develop it. I know my grandfather, bless his heart and soul, lived till he was 89, and smoked like a chimney. Smoked cigarettes, smoked cigars, smoked pipes. Uh, and then other people I know die of disease in their 40s and 50s, and no rhyme or reason. But it's the odds. It's the if you smoke, you have a higher chance. If you drink, you have a higher chance. If you don't see the doctor, you have a higher chance of dying from even some of these chronic diseases. So it's your choice. It's not my choice. It's everybody's choice. So we look at the health profile. Leading cause of death, obviously, is cancers. Next is heart disease. Heart disease is preventable. Cancers, we think there's things you can do to prevent it, but we're not all too sure. Number one cause of adults between 45 and 54, and 55 and 64 is prostate, lung, and colorectal cancer for men. Breast, lung, and colorectal cancer for women between those ages. The leading cause of death for women, though, is heart disease. And we can go on, and we did in one of my other courses talk about breast cancer. Breast cancer is continually has about an 89% 5-year survival rate if detected, which is fantastic. It's one of the top 3 curable cancers. Again, do people go? Do people see doctors? Do people get their mammograms? Those all have pieces into this puzzle. The age adjusted for cardiac has dropped every year for the last 60 years, but it's still high. I always say that none of us are getting out of this alive. We're all going to die of something. So it's a pretty fatalistic view, as my mother-in-law says. But the more you can put off, the more you can take care of yourself, so the lesser your risk of dying early. Risk factors: smoking, exercise, BMI, body mass index, screenings. How many people don't get screenings? I do. I mean, I have the colonoscopy. I have my stress test. I have my PSA. I do all those things because I've been involved. Uh, my late wife was detected with breast cancer because she was doing yearly mammograms, and she lived about 20 years after her diagnosis and treatment for cancer, and did not die of cancer, died of something else. So she got an extra 20 years in her life by follow up. So that's important to do. So kind of to wrap this up, that what we're talking about in this thing is really the essence of community health. It's not it's the medicine, but it's also how we access, use, and teach people to access and use medicine. And that the idea of community health is not strictly to prevent colds or to stamp out mosquitoes. It's to probably stress and use the system better. I hope these notes kind of get, and the idea of these things are not to be a lecture, because again, we don't have quizzes or tests, but they're to kind of keep you or start your mind thinking about community health, because you're both two smart people and can figure this out. And what I'm trying to do is put a few hooks and things out there to consider, and some thoughts to take away. Okay, finished for the day. I'll try to get this posted. First, I have to join the tape where I stopped with the tape where I didn't stop, and then we'll go from there. But again, any questions, comments, or exciting thoughts, please write me, email me, call me. I'm available. Catherine knows yesterday she sent me an email, and I was about 15 miles off the coast of New York fishing. Got it and answered her probably within 45 minutes. So with this new modern cell phone junk, you're available all the time. I will be available Thursday night for a live session if anybody wants to talk. If you don't, that's fine too. I log on for 10 minutes. If anybody wants to just access me, that's a set time and place to do it. Again, we're halfway through. Keep pressing. The race isn't over until you cross the finish line. With that great note, have a good evening, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.